if we abolish the Heaviside Maxwell concept completely and go to the J.J. Thomson concept, and Steinmetz came to a similar conclusion, there is no electromagnetic waves, and there aren't any of these other waves. What it is you have an electrostatic field propagating down the line, you have a magnetic field propagating down the line, and it's only the apparent superposition of them that gives you the velocity. That's why you can't see the stars or the sun in outer space, okay? Because the fields are not co-joined. The reason why the wire exists in the electrical system is so the magnetic field can exchange itself with the dielectric field. It's there strictly as a translational type of item. It's not there to conduct the electricity. It's there to translate the electricity.
Is the surface of the wire the interface to the ether, and that's actually what propagates this motion, these different forces? Is that what's going on?
Right. What Maxwell's discovery was is the electricity flows in the insulators, not the conductors. Power industry has a problem. Okay, LA Water and Power generates its electricity in Las Vegas because they don't care if they puke out the air in Las Vegas, because Las Vegas is a place to puke. So what they do is they have this giant power line that carries it from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, which seems fine and dandy. The resistance of the line obviously is small. Okay, but the problem is the power wants to flow at the speed of light. Okay, now here's the condition that occurs. If the generators in Las Vegas are attempted to stay synchronous with the generators in Los Angeles, the problem is it takes a certain amount of time for the electromagnetic wave to propagate from Los Angeles, or from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. So now if the generator in Las Vegas is sitting at top dead center, so to speak, on one cylinder of an engine, or however you want to represent the phases, the one in Los Angeles has fallen behind by about 1/8 of a cycle. Okay, now if you get to the situation where the line is 1/4 wavelength long, a wavelength at 60 cycles is 2,880 miles. So it's kind of hard to do, but there are some power lines that are very long. So here's what has to be done. If the line gets longer, the generator at the other end becomes more and more, it's in step at what it thinks happening because the retarded potential. When they become 90 degrees apart, they can no longer stay synchronized and you get a big blast. So here's what the power company
Unless
does.
you have quantum entanglement.
Well, whatever, that doesn't exist in this talk. That's denied. Okay? So here's how they do it. They don't involve themselves in quantum mysticism because you can't make anything out of it that works in the electrical world. They use a very simple thing. They do what we were just talking about here. What they do is they take every 100 miles on the power line and put a capacitor in series with the power line. Now that capacitance in series with the power line sets the time angle back every time the wave is going through a capacitor station. These capacitors are gigantic. It would take 10 of these rooms to hold them. What this does is then it takes no time for the wave to go from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, and the two generators can stay in synchronism. What the power company done has made the propagation velocity through the Alexanderson and Tesla principles infinite. So there's no time delay of energy propagation. Now this is a practical example utilized by the utility companies to bring the two spatially separated items into one unit dimension in the dimension of time by neutralizing space. This is one way, this is how Tesla would transmit. He wouldn't transmit by transmitting the energy. He worked on the principle that the energy is brought into one by a mutual relationship where there is no velocity. In counter space, it's a counter velocity. The farther apart you are in counter space, the closer you are together. That's why these planets can have such a profound influence on the sun, which is going on right now. There's a big planetary alignment, and the sunspot number has been on the bottom now for, it's 22-year cycles at that zero dead point, and this will be the point in the next month which will start to rise and create all the usual havocs it does to the radio and power industry. And
the physicist would like us to believe that free energy doesn't exist due to the law of conservation of energy, and they would also like us to believe that this is not an electrical universe, They don't want us to suspect that everything can be translated into electricity. In other words, the most fundamental level of physical reality is electricity. Once you get past electricity, you get to the spiritual side of life, God. But just short of that, at the junction point, just before we leap off of the most finest relative of creation and go beyond and transcend creation, at that junction point, the essential nature of creation, of the universe, or of science for that matter, is electricity. And the physicist would like to control the situation and prevent us from knowing this because A, it gives them a little ego boost, but more importantly, they're being manipulated too. We're not the only ones being manipulated, the public, the layperson. But they're being manipulated. There are layers and upon layers of manipulation, and each layer of individuals don't appreciate how much they're being manipulated. They become a tool for somebody else. Their ignorance prevents them from seeing. Their eagerness to get involved is, in a sense, their bane, their Achilles heel, because they don't see to what degree they're being manipulated. But it is true that electricity, that anything, nuclear physics, chemistry can be converted. Doesn't mean they're useless. That they're very useful. They're like the material sciences because they help us deal with the physical aspect of science. But electricity goes beyond physicality. The abstraction of knowing the engineering behind it is so subtle and yet so simple in its general form that a child could understand it. Essentially, you don't have to be an electrical engineer to understand the mechanics at the simplest level. The mathematical mechanics of electricity is so simple, even a child could understand it. A child in, say, not elementary school, let's say junior high. That kind of mathematics, just simple algebra. If a child can understand simple geometry, simple algebra, without the use of trigonometry, let alone calculus, they could appreciate the fundamental, the unique and fundamental way of looking at electricity that is contrary to the status quo. So that means most layperson could understand it, because most lay people do understand, simple algebra. So it is a presentable topic in its broad form, and it is possible to reawaken the freedom to understand that electricity at the essential nature is a wild stallion. It is governed by various limitations that are built into the system to prevent electricity from fully expressing its wild nature and blowing up the universe. And if you learn how to manipulate those limitations to your advantage in a safe way, because I've learned ways of creating free energy through the few years I've spent on the simulator that are dangerous and not very useful for that reason. They produce a tremendous amount of energy too quickly. So you have to have a certain amount of self-regulation built into your use of free energy, or else it'll blow up in your face. So there are multiple issues. The first challenge is people's ignorance, and I think driven by a certain amount of fear, not to pursue the topic. But once you get past the fear, if you have any curiosity whatsoever, now it's the the technical ignorance, not the general ignorance to deal with. And the simulator is a perfect training ground because the simulator is a robot. It cannot unless public policy has been written into the simulator and to prevent it from being realistic, and those are usually don't come expensive. You know, there's two problems to a cheap simulator or a free simulator. There are two problems to a free simulator. One is that it may not be realistic in the sense that it will prevent you from learning about free energy, and the other non-realism is that it will make it too easy as an alternative. It might be too easy, and you'll be blowing up your circuits in virtual realm of the simulator all too often until you learn how to regulate them. But they'll still be too easy, even if you learn how to create it and regulate it. So then you have to go looking around for simulators that cost a lot of money. Those are the ones to learn from, ultimately, because they're realistic. And that's the real world, right? We pay for what we value. And that's usually the way the Western mind thinks, is you want value, you pay for it. So you have to look for a simulator that actually costs a few $1,000s, you know, between $2,000 and $5,000 or more and up. And then you're dealing with a unit that'll probably give you results if you know the technique as well as believe that it's possible, or else you won't even go there. It takes a certain amount of technical savvy, like anything else, because you're dealing with resonance. And it's a little complicated, because you don't want your load that your electrical appliance is going to carry to hamper that resonance. So you have to have a mini load, a light load, built into the circuit to prevent it from latching on to latching its resonance on to the load, the actual load that it's going to carry. You know, like the headlamp on a car or the light bulb in a flashlight. That's the main load that you want to service with your circuit in a highly efficient way, such that instead of the normal manner of a 1.5 volt battery funding the energy for that light bulb on that flashlight, instead you have a minuscule, an infinitesimally minute quantity of energy that you have to use to run that light bulb. So we're not talking zero cost here. There's still going to be a cost, but we reduce it to the point that now the battery that ran that flashlight can now run your car, and it can be charged or recharged by a solar panel the size of a solar panel on a wallet-sized calculator. That's the ridiculousness of the ignorance, the pervasive ignorance that we have, and the policy that physicists merely are the police. Literally, they're the official police watchdogs to ensure that we don't go down this path of free energy. Because if we did, it would make us all sovereigns. You know the definition of a sovereign? He's the ruler of his realm, right? Or her realm. And why? By divine right. You know, the divine right of kings and queens. And all too often, sovereigns became worshipped as embodiments of divinity. Well, if we're the people who founded this country, you know, the United States of America, way, way back in the day, they considered us all to be sovereign, and then we lost that at the opening days of the Civil War, March 1861, when the 9 congressmen walked out of Congress. We lost our republic, and first we had a dictatorship under Lincoln, and then we had an incorporated United States after the close of the war, during the Reconstruction period, and we've had one ever since. So we really don't have a republic anymore that stands for sovereignty of the individual. We have corporate pawns, and that's what we are. We're pawns of the corporate world. And, you know, they're not in charge of the physicists any more than the physicists are in charge of us, but it's kind of like the KGB status of Mother Russia back in the day, in which everybody was so fraught with fear that everybody watched over everybody else's shoulder and prevented any kind of freedom from manifesting. And here in this country, it's not so much you end up in the gulag in the Siberia, so much as you're just shunned. You you lose your reputation if you start talking about free energy. You get booted out of forums, and so forth and so on. But it's all due to our ignorance. So we don't have a clue, and so it's easy to be manipulated due to ignorance, and also an attempt to appeal to emotion, an attempt to go to authority figures. That's not going to help because they're under the same limitation that we are. And let's see, emotion, authority, and common sense. Oh, well, nobody else has talked about this, so why should we listen to you? Why should you listen to me? So those are the three very popular mainstream fallacies of logic. There are 5 main fallacies of logic, but those are the 3 that are in popular use today, restricting us from growing past the corporate mindset and reclaiming our sovereignty as is our divine right. You know, our Constitution was set up to give us sovereignty at the level of the individual. And if we all had free energy, namely energy that was so inexpensive, so cost effective that the cost of a postage stamp to bill us would cost more than the bill, that's the way free energy cost would end up becoming. That would free the individual and put us in a whole different light and take us out of the corporate mindset and demolish a lot of corporations. So there would be a major overhaul to the economy because we would not be based on money anymore. We wouldn't need so much money to get things done. We'd only need money for luxuries. We wouldn't need money for the necessities of life. So it would mean a whole restructuring of society. It's mind-blowing, the consequences of free energy, and that's why the powers that be prevent it. Maybe not because they don't want it to happen, maybe they just don't want it to happen overnight. But be that as it may, I'm not a believer in going slow with anything. And so I'm always busy pushing the idea, and so I do it in my own small way, by giving presentations in one format or another that help introduce this idea. Because I'm not a specialist by any means. I'm a generalist, and I'm very good at integrating because I've had a lot of time, basically, to study various topics and integrate each one into the prior topic so that I get an overview, a very broad view of the situation. But I'm also motivated to see some change happen, and so the only way to do that is to continue to pursue change by way of periodically interacting with people to share with them my point of view so that they're a little less ignorant than before. They don't have to believe or agree in anything, but at the very least, my opportunity to introduce an idea and a set of ideas that go with that idea, you know, supporting ideas, along with the main idea, so that you can't say you have not been warned. Essentially, when it comes time to be judged, and I will not be the one to do the judging of anyone, you won't be able to say to your conscience with any sort of self-regard or self-respect that you have not been warned. So there's a certain responsibility that comes with knowledge, and that's why I do consider knowledge to be a burden, and that's why a lot of people don't want to listen about this. They want to shut it off right away because they don't want the responsibility of knowing more than what they already know, because it means they'll have to make changes in their life. And they don't want to see change. They want to see success, but they're afraid of losing success in the face of change. And the stability that they've managed to wrangle out of life to the extent that they have up to this point in time, it's scary. I can imagine it's scary to a lot of people You know, when security comes first, you know, survival. When survival comes first, fitting in. You don't want to be shunned and laughed at and ridiculed. Those are the two main problems besetting most people's ignorance and desire not to know any more than what they already know. Beyond that, it's really not too much an issue. Because free energy, by its nature, cannot be dominated. Because the nature of electricity is a wild stallion. And so left to its own devices, it refuses to be dominated. In the sense that it doesn't pay attention to wanting to be dominated. You know, it's not subservient to, oh, I want to be dominated, you know, I want to be controlled. No, we do that only because we choose to, and we control it too much. Because A, we don't understand, and B, we're not allowed to know how to control energy in an intelligent manner such that we give it a little wiggle room, a little more wiggle room than what we've given it so far. Yet still control it so that it doesn't fly in our face and blow up. And I guess it goes back to the idea that we don't believe we are divine by birthright, even though we have to earn it. We have to grow into it. We have to evolve into it. But as a birthright, divinity and the sovereignty that comes with divinity, or sovereignty that comes with divinity, any way you want to look at it, they run together. And that means we get to be co-creators. You know, the universe is managed by the Creator already. Or you don't even have to believe in God. But we do have this birthright to be in charge of designing a better world. Because we already are in charge of designing the world as we find it. You know, the man-made world, our society, our culture. So it would be evasive and hypocritical to say that we're not already in charge. It's just a question of how much more in charge do you want to be with your life instead of leaving it to somebody else. And if you're happy with the way things are, then nothing I'm saying will be of any use to you. But if you want to see some change happen, then it is possible to get an education on the subject. And that's why I've written the 3 books that I have. 2 on the same topic. It's just one is in Spanish and one is in English. The Spanish was an exercise in improving my grammatical style and in having a better appreciation for what it is I'm trying to say. So I had to rectify my presentation as well as my content by trying to use Google Translator to translate into a foreign language. But once I did that, I pretty much was finished with that text. So I have 2 versions of that give away the circuit concept in its slight variations that I've dealt with. And it's a motorized transformer, basically, that becomes its own generator. But then I have this 3rd one that deals with all the theory. And it's not very long. It's actually a very short book, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 the size of the other book, and the other book is very small. I mean, the other book is around 30 pages, and this one is around 13 pages, I believe, or 12 or 13. I think it's 13, no, 16. It's up to 16 pages now. But still, it's not big enough to make a paperback book on Amazon. It's barely big enough to make a Kindle. So I get to sell it. But I could also give it as a presentation. You stand up in front of a crowd and give a presentation and just read from the text. Or display this audio and display a few transparencies projected by an overhead projector and field questions. And give away free copies of the theory book on Kindle to anybody in the audience who wants it. I guess that's all I really have to say. So sovereignty means we have the divine right to have whatever kind of life we want to have. And if we want a better life, all we have to do is make it happen. It's really a grassroots objective because authority is not going to come to our aid. We have to come to our own aid if we want to see a better world, a different world. If we want to see a different world along certain lines in which we have more freedom to make more choice. We have more choices, giving us more freedom of choice. Right now we have a certain amount of freedom, and for a lot of people that's good enough. But we could have more freedom of choice, more options to choose from. You know, what I envision is that we're no longer plugged into a utility grid. So the utility grid would be the only thing that would actually disappear completely, while money would become less significant, but it would still be around for people who are wealthy and want to spend money on luxuries. Fine, let them spend it on luxuries. But all the necessities of life, which are not just food and shelter and clothing, but also education and recreation and travel and, you know, yoga and meditation and self-help and development, which is what education is. It's just you don't stop at high school or college, you go on for life. So, you know, the necessities of life can be opened up. They're kind of limited at the moment because they expect us to go to work. We expect ourselves to go to work, and we don't have time to go to school anymore, you know. So actually we could go back to school. You know, that's a necessity of life, is to keep going for an education. If that's what you want, you should be able to do so. So all the necessities of life need to be opened up and freed. So free energy is really about freeing up the necessities of life by redefining what they are to a greater scope, so that we can all appreciate them to their full maximum extent. And only luxuries should cost us something. So money won't be too important, and the utility grid will be non-important. Because what I see happening with this scaling down approach to looking at how free energy works, because it's not a perpetual motion machine, I'm finding out. You know, the definition of perpetual motion machine is a very strange definition. It literally, if you look it up, it says, and if you look for over unity, you won't find the definition. You keep getting redirected to perpetual motion machine, and it's defined as being a machine that has no energy input whatsoever and just runs continuously, and that's so bogus, it's unbelievable. You have to have some energy to make more energy. We know this to be true. It takes money to make more money. Well, it takes a little energy to make a lot more, and you don't need much, but it does take some. So what I see, when you think about it, what does that mean? It means every single appliance can have its own power plant built into it, and so the only cost for energy is an upfront cost when you buy your appliance, because you're buying the intelligence to put the right circuitry in there so that you will never have to plug that appliance into the grid, into an electric outlet. In other words, you'll never have to recharge its batteries, because they will be done for you by a teensy-weensy little solar panel built onto the side of the thing, or some other way. You know, when you take, for instance, to give you an example, wrist watches can be powered so efficiently, because they consume so little power to begin with, that they don't even need batteries or even a solar panel. That you can put a motion device inside a wristwatch just by its motion, when you move your wrist around, is enough to run itself, to recharge its battery and run itself. So these things could be done easily, very easily, built into appliances, so that we no longer have to pay for energy. We pay for everything else, but because energy would be cost-free, relatively speaking, for all practical purposes, that's why I use the word free energy so freely, because relatively speaking, that's what it comes down to. It's practically for zero cost when it comes to energy. Then that frees up a lot of things and makes a lot of things available to us as a way of life to change our life. And I don't know if people are ready for that yet, but I know I am. I mean, so why shouldn't I talk like that and not be ashamed of it or keep it to myself? Why not talk about it, that it's possible for all of us to have that kind of a life? Really, the only restriction on life is whether or not you have money to spend on luxuries, that's all. Things you don't need. You know, do you really need a private jet? You know, Well, I don't know. I don't think so. You know, these scooters, these electric scooters, I'm fascinated. I've been out of the loop for quite some time, but I learned recently about these electric scooters, and now my ex-girlfriend has learned about them too. And they're so cool. They stand on the street, and you have an app on your phone, and you pay for it, you rent it, and you use it to take you from one part of the town to another. They're like a rental car. And you get on it, and you can't use them on the sidewalk by law. You have to use them in the street, so you have to wear a helmet, you know, and I've seen people not use them and not wear helmets. And it goes pretty fast. It goes 10 miles an hour. And they go, and they're gone. And it's amazing. And so, you know, it's conveniences like this that make you wonder what more is in store for us. So this is one little area I've focused on, because it bothers me that electric cars are not consumer friendly. Nobody really wants to buy them, you know, or else Detroit would be whipping them out, but they don't want to sell them because their sales would go down, because electric cars last a long time, but they're tied to batteries, and the batteries overheat, and it's almost like we've transferred all of the mishigas, the nonsense involved with running an engine-based car, to that of a battery-based car, because now instead of the engine getting hot, it's the battery pack that heats up and has the potential for exploding. You know, lithium batteries, although the technology has improved, initially there was a lot of danger involved with that. That's why I bought an electric car based on the nickel metal hydride chemistry, which has been superseded, unfortunately, by lithium, because nickel metal hydride is safer. And it's a little cheaper, a little heavier than lithium, takes up a little more space, but it's a lot safer. You know, it's the Volvo of batteries when it comes to safety. Well, at least traditionally Volvo was always considered the safest car on the road. I've heard differently about Volvo nowadays, but at least my brother, when he bought his Volvo brand new from the dealer in 1968, I went with him. We drove over the Baldwin Hills in L.A. to fetch it, and he was so proud of he called it Olga. He named it Olga, and he was so proud of it because he did the research, and, you know, our mother was concerned, and he said, well, look, you know, I did my research. This is the safest car I can buy. So he said, okay, and so she let him go and buy it, and that's an important concern, because energy can be lethal if not managed properly. It can blow up in your face with all the power of a bomb. It's no different than a bomb, because a bomb is no different than energy. It's an electrical event that happens very suddenly, and in the case of free energy, there's no chemistry of a bomb involved. There's no chemistry of a bomb required. We can totally remove the chemistry of a bomb and still have the electrical event that the bomb engages in when it explodes, and induce that electrical event through a circuit rather than a chemical combustion or a nuclear event, for that matter. You know, bombs are amazing concepts when you start to look at them a little bit. The Nazis sure did make use of them to a very great degree. It doesn't mean we have to, but I'm just illustrating the point that free energy does exist, and the Nazis didn't have any compulsion against making use of such technology, but that technology is not available to us. It's highly classified, highly proprietary property of the U.S. military, so we don't get to see it. But it's not to say that we can't understand it. And it's not to say that we can't have it either. We can have whatever we want. You know, we're not run by a military dictatorship. If we want a different world, we can have it. All we have to do is choose it.